His hands didn't ask. They remembered. Every place they touched, they had already claimed the night before, and the night before that. But this time, it was different. This time, I wanted it. Not because I loved him. Not yet. But because something inside me had stopped resisting. Maybe it was the way he whispered my name like a secret he never meant to say out loud. Maybe it was the way my body responded before my mind could object. That night, he didn't just take me once. He returned, over and over, like a man trying to rewrite history with skin and breath. And I let him. Not because I had to, because I needed to know what it meant to be chosen, even if I was never asked. If you're still with me, if this story has stirred something in you, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. There's more where this came from. They say every silence has a shape. That night, silence filled the backseat of the black car like a liquid, cold, thick, pressing against my skin. I didn't ask where we were going. My father wouldn't have answered. He just stared out the window, the kind of stillness that came from too much whiskey and too many bad debts. His silence wasn't guilt. It was emptiness. The mountains grew taller the farther we drove. Trees leaned in like voyeurs. The sky turned from slate to ash, then nothing. When the car finally stopped, I stepped out and felt the gravel shift beneath my feet like a warning. The house loomed in front of us. Not beautiful, not warm, just vast, stone and glass, a house designed to outlive emotion. Cassian Vale didn't come to the door. He didn't greet us. Instead, a man in a gray coat, a lawyer maybe, led us inside. The hallway smelled like cedar wood and old paper. I walked past mirrors that refused to reflect warmth. My reflection was pale, unfamiliar, like someone halfway erased. They brought us to a room that felt like a vault. A table, 2 chairs, a document, a pen. My father took it without hesitation, signed where they told him, and left without looking back. He didn't say goodbye, didn't even say my name. Cassian signed last. No words, no glance in my direction. Just a hand, long fingers, cold knuckles, dragging the pen like it meant nothing, but I meant something. At least on paper. A commodity. A currency. A signature away from disappearing. The housekeeper showed me to my room. "This is yours," she said, then paused, uncertain. "For now." There were no windows, just a single lamp that cast long shadows across stone walls, a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. A bed, too large, too cold, with white sheets tucked so tightly it looked like a coffin. I sat on the edge. My hands lay still in my lap, but inside, everything trembled. No one had told me what to expect tonight, but I wasn't stupid. I was 22, not untouched by reality, only by affection. I counted the minutes like stitches. The room didn't echo, but the silence had weight. I kept thinking of the last thing my mother ever said to me before she died. Don't mistake. Quiet for peace. The door opened sometime past midnight. He didn't knock. Cassian walked in like he already belonged there, to the space, to the moment, to my fate. He didn't speak. Not one word. And yet, every movement was deliberate. Stripped of pretense, stripped of hesitation. He closed the door with the kind of finality that made my stomach twist. My skin knew what was coming before my mind would allow it. He stopped in front of me. I couldn't meet his eyes, but I felt them, sharp as frostbite, watching the parts of me that still clung to dignity. He touched my shoulder. Just barely. Flinched. He didn't apologize. Didn't ask. His hand moved to the ribbon at my back. Unfastened. Waited. My breath caught. I hated the way my body responded. Not with desire, but with surrender. A trained reflex from a life spent avoiding pain. The dress fell. So did I. It didn't hurt. Not like I thought it would. It wasn't gentle either. He wasn't making love. He wasn't even making eye contact. It was something else, quieter than violence, colder than lust. Possession. He took me once. Then again, like he was trying to forget something by carving it out of me. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, because crying meant feeling, and I couldn't afford to feel. Not then. When it was over, he stayed for a moment. Breathing. His chest rose and fell like someone running from memory. Then he stood, adjusted his shirt, walked out, still no words. The door clicked shut. I lay there, still, unsure if I existed. My body wasn't broken, but something inside had shifted. Not shattered, not bruised, just unhooked. Like a picture on the wall that had hung crooked for years, but no one noticed until it fell. I didn't fall asleep. I waited, not for him to return, but for the part of me that had left to come back. It didn't. Instead, I noticed the air, the weight of it. This wasn't safety. It wasn't cruelty either. It was something in between, a space between yes and no, between girl and woman, between slave and wife. In the morning, I sat on the bed with the sheet pulled tight around my shoulders, staring at the closed door. I didn't feel owned. I didn't feel free. But what haunted me most wasn't what he did. It was that a part of me was already listening, waiting, for the sound of his footsteps to return. I didn't see him the next morning. There was no breakfast, no staff, no small talk. The house seemed designed for ghosts, not people. Long corridors without windows, doors that didn't creak, furniture too pristine to have ever been lived in. A home curated for presence without presence. My room remained unchanged, the sheets still warm from what had happened, the air still carrying his scent. Cedarwood, leather, cold metal. I hadn't moved. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't even cried. There was no space for tears in a body that hadn't yet decided what had happened. I was no longer untouched, but I wasn't sure I had been touched either. By late afternoon, hunger reminded me I was human. I wandered the house until I found the kitchen, clinical, steel-lined, and stocked like a showroom. I made toast. It tasted like nothing. The butter didn't melt. He didn't appear. But I saw signs of him. A coat draped over the back of a chair, a glass left half full on the counter, a leather-bound book on the windowsill, open to a page halfway through. I didn't dare read. It felt like intrusion, and I was already enough of that. That night, I waited. Not because I wanted to, because I didn't know what would happen if I didn't. The sheets were freshly changed. I didn't know who did it. I didn't hear anyone come in. That unsettled me more than if the bed had been left stained and cold. I lay there, stiff as the mattress. My body remembered more than my mind allowed. Remembered the weight, the silence, the rhythm of him, the way he hadn't spoken, the way I hadn't stopped him. I had consented only by not resisting. Was that the same thing? He came again. Past midnight. No knock. No hesitation. This time, he turned off the lamp. It was worse in the dark. I couldn't brace for him, couldn't read his face, couldn't prepare my breath. He touched me like routine, like ritual, like something already expected. Not rough, not soft, just methodical. And again. And again. And when it was over, he stayed longer than the first night. He sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, his back to me. I watched the outline of his spine beneath the fabric. Rigid, tense. Beautiful, in a way I didn't want to admit. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just whispered, so quiet I almost thought I imagined it. "This is the only way I don't dream." Then he left. I woke late the next day. My body felt different. Not ruined, not broken, just shifted. Like I had stepped into a role I didn't audition for. I put on the only other dress I had brought, pale gray, long-sleeved, modest, forgettable. Just like I wanted to be. As I walked the halls, I started noticing things I hadn't before. A scratch on the banister. A burn mark near the fireplace. A picture frame turned backward on a desk in the study. Details. Imperfections. Proof that someone had lived here before. Someone who no longer did. The staff, what little of them I saw, avoided me. Polite smiles, lowered eyes. They answered, nothing. They offered nothing. One woman placed a cup of tea on my nightstand while I bathed and was gone before I emerged. I tried to ask her name once. She only bowed her head. This was not a home. It was a contract. The third night, I tried to stay awake. I didn't want him to catch me unaware again, but exhaustion won. And when I woke, he was already there. This time, he didn't undress me. He touched the hem of my nightgown, hesitated, and then lifted it. There was something gentler in the way his fingers brushed my thigh. I hated that I noticed. And then, I hated that I didn't hate it. Afterward, he stayed longer. He lay beside me, breathing, not touching. I could feel the heat of him, the weight of his presence, but he didn't move. Didn't say a word. My throat was dry. I whispered, "Why are you doing this?" His response was barely audible. "Because you let me," I wanted to scream. Let him? Did I? I thought of the paper I'd never signed. The marriage I never agreed to. The fact that every night he walked through that door, and I never stopped him. But the most terrifying part wasn't what he did. It was what I began to feel when the door didn't open. On the fifth night, he didn't come. The hours bled together. The silence pressed harder. And for the first time, I realized I was listening for his footsteps. He didn't come the sixth night either. The silence bloomed differently this time. Not like emptiness, like ache. A low, thrumming need. Not for the act itself, but for the strange stillness he brought when he lay beside me. The kind of stillness that felt less like being alone. It's cruel. What the body can crave before the heart has caught up. Or maybe before the heart has had time to run. I lay in bed fully clothed, sleepless, watching the sliver of light from beneath the door fade and return as the hallway lamps timed out. Each time it lit again, I held my breath. Each time it went dark, I felt the air collapse in my lungs. I hated him, and I missed him. Both could be true. The seventh night, I found the door to his study cracked open. I shouldn't have stopped, but the light was warm, golden instead, of cold, and curiosity is a dangerous kind of hunger. I stepped in. Books lined the walls, not organized by color or author, but by where. The ones he loved most were nearly breaking at the spine. There was a record playing, soft jazz, scratchy, old, a trumpet that sounded like grief with nowhere to go. Cassian sat at the desk, back turned. He didn't flinch when I entered, didn't look up. Just said, "You shouldn't be here." I wanted to ask why, but something in his posture, the way his hands were still, clasped together like a prayer or a plea, kept me quiet. Instead, I looked around. My eyes landed on the painting over the fireplace. A woman. Face half finished. Colors blurred. Hair like mine. I swallowed. "Who is she?" He stood abruptly. "I said you shouldn't be here." He didn't yell. He didn't have to. his voice, could cut through glass. I turned and walked out, but I didn't forget the way he clenched his jaw, not in anger, but in restraint. That night, I waited again. Wore the same dress. Combed my hair. Sat upright in bed like I might speak if he came. Like I might say, stop, or stay. I didn't know which, but he didn't come. And I hated myself for the disappointment. It was the 9th night when it finally broke. I heard his footsteps, slower this time. Not the sharp, purposeful stride I had come to expect. He stopped at the door, didn't open it, just stood there. I could feel him. On the other side, breathing. I slid off the bed, my bare feet against cold floor, my fingers on the doorknob. It didn't turn. I didn't open it. But I whispered, "If you walk away again, don't come back." Silence. Then a breath, audible, like something had collapsed inside him. And he walked away anyway. The next morning, I found a cup of tea waiting on my windowsill. It wasn't from the housekeeper. She didn't know I took sugar. He did. The 10th night, he returned. He didn't touch me right away. He stood at the foot of the bed, like he wasn't sure if I'd allow him. He wasn't asking, but he was waiting. I sat up, looked at him, at the shadows under his eyes, at the tension in his shoulders that never seemed to leave. "Why do you come?" I asked. He blinked. Then, softly, "Because you don't stop me." He moved toward me, slowly, gently, like I might run. I didn't. He reached out, brushed my collarbone with the back of his knuckles. The contact barely registered, but it sparked something hot and unwanted in my chest. I looked away. But I didn't move away. His hand slid beneath my hair, traced the base of my neck, then paused. He said nothing, but his silence wasn't empty this time. It was full of things he couldn't name, and I wasn't ready to hear. He kissed me, not like the other nights, not like a man claiming a thing he purchased, like someone trying to remember how to ask for something. It shook me, not because it was tender, but because I felt myself lean into it. That was the betrayal. Not to my body, but to the part of me that had promised I would not want him. He undressed me like he was unwrapping something fragile. I hated that it made me tremble. Not in fear, in longing. His mouth on my collarbone, his hand gripping my thigh, his breath against my ear. This wasn't like before. This was slower and worse. Because I started to want it. To want him. Not for protection. Not out of resignation. But for reasons I didn't understand and couldn't forgive. When it was over, he didn't leave. He lay beside me, and I asked, not aloud, just to myself, "If this is still a prison, why do I feel safest here?" He didn't come on the 6th night. The absence hurt more than the act itself ever had. I hadn't expected to miss the sound of his footsteps, the weight of silence breaking just enough to let something human slip through. But when night bled into morning, and the door never creaked open, I found myself staring at it like a widow waiting for a husband who was never really hers. It was easier when he was just a stranger who entered without asking. Harder now that I noticed when he stayed away. On the 7th night, I left my room. I didn't mean to wander, but the stillness of the house pushed me out like a tide. I passed long corridors with wallpaper that curled at the edges, bookshelves too neat to be read. A house like this wasn't made for people. It was made for display. A mausoleum with central heating. I paused outside a half-open door, drawn by the flicker of a warm light. His study. I stepped inside. Cassian sat at his desk, his back straight, his hands still. Not writing, not moving, just staring at something I couldn't see from where I stood. I should have turned away. But my voice betrayed me. Who is she? He didn't flinch. Just turned a page in a leather notebook and said, "No one." There was a painting above the fireplace. A woman, unfinished. Her face a blur. Her hair dark and familiar. There was no signature. No frame. Just color. Haunting. The wall like memory. I asked again, softer. "Was she your wife?" He stood up. "That room is yours. This one is mine." It wasn't anger in his voice. It was warning. I left before he had to say it again. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat upright in bed, the lamp on, the silence thick. My body remembered too much. The way his hand had moved without trembling. The way mine hadn't moved at all. It hadn't been pain that stayed with me. It was how easy it had become to stop resisting. On the 8th night, I waited again. This time not out of fear, but anticipation I couldn't justify. I wore the softest nightgown I had. Long sleeves, loose around the wrists, slightly frayed at the collar. Innocent, forgettable. I brushed my hair out of habit, not desire. When the door finally opened, it was slower than usual. Cassian stepped in, closing it behind him. But he didn't come to me. He stood by the fireplace for a long time, watching the embers he hadn't lit. "I shouldn't be here," he said. Then, "Do you want me to leave?" I didn't answer, because the silence between us was louder than anything I could say. He crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed, not touching me. I shifted, inching closer. That was the moment. Not the kiss. Not the heat of his body. The inch. The choice. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't rebellion. It was something quieter. Something more dangerous. He didn't ask this time. But he waited. He undressed me slowly, like he was afraid the fabric might cut me if he pulled too fast. His hands were colder than the room, but my skin warmed under every touch. And I hated how natural it felt. This trespass dressed in tenderness. He lay beside me, not over me. His mouth found my shoulder, my collarbone, the place beneath my ear that had never been kissed before. My breath caught in my throat, not from fear, from the betrayal of wanting. When he entered me, it wasn't like the first night. There was no urgency, no detachment, no war, just gravity, slow and suffocating. I let him, and for the first time, I moved with him. Afterwards, we didn't speak. He lay on his back, arm resting across his chest, staring at the ceiling like it might break if he blinked. I wanted to ask what he saw. I didn't, because I didn't know what I would do with the answer. Instead, I turned toward him, curled beneath the sheet that still smelled like cedar and dust. My voice came out small. "This isn't love." He nodded. "I know." But neither of us moved away. In the morning, I woke before him. He was still asleep, jaw unclenched, one hand lying palm up between us, like something open, like something tired of being closed. I got out of bed quietly, pulled my robe, tight, and walked to the windowless corner of the room. There was no view, no sunlight. But I stood there anyway, because somehow in that moment, I needed the absence more than the light. Later that day, I found a cup of tea outside my door. It was just how I liked it. Milk, no sugar, still warm. There was no note, no tray, just the smallest proof that someone had listened. That night, I didn't wait for him. But when he came, I opened the door before he could knock. He didn't touch me that night. He sat in the chair across the room, elbows on, knees head in hands. The light from the fireplace flickered along the edges of his jaw, casting his face in something half shadow, half sorrow. I watched him from the bed, wrapped in the same nightgown he had slid off me the night before. My body still carried the memory of his hands, but something colder pressed against my ribs now, like a truth trying to rise. He hadn't said a word, neither had I. But silence can rot faster than words. It curdles. It contaminates. Especially when it's thick with all the things you won't say. I thought about the painting in his study. The unfinished woman. Her blurred face. The way her presence hovered even when we made love. Like she was watching. Like she was waiting. I hated her. And I didn't even know her name. After a long while, he looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. Not from crying, I think. From holding too much in. "I thought you wouldn't let me in again," he said. It was the first time his voice cracked, and something in me broke open with it. "I shouldn't have," I whispered. "I still don't know why I did." Cassian didn't answer, but the weight of him filled the room like confession. The next morning, I returned to the study. Alone. The door wasn't locked. I stood in front of the painting. Closer now. The strokes were rough, unfinished. There were outlines for a mouth that was never completed, for eyes that had been painted over and over until no shape remained. He had tried to remember her, or erase her, and failed at both. There was a note on the desk beneath it, scribbled in thick ink. "What you do not grieve will rot inside you." It wasn't signed, but I knew it was his. When he found me there. Later, I didn't flinch. "I'm not her," I said. Cassian leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, voice low. "I know." "Do you?" I asked. I stepped toward him, one pace, then another. "If you touch me while thinking of her," I said, "then don't touch me at all." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were softer than I'd ever seen. "I haven't touched anyone since her," he said, "until you." We didn't sleep together that night. We didn't even share a bed. But I felt closer to him than I had during the nights his hands were on my skin, because this was the first time he gave me something without taking. Days passed. The house felt different, lived in. He started eating breakfast again, in silence, but beside me. Sometimes he made the tea. He never touched me unless I invited him to. That, I learned, was the most disarming form of possession. When someone who could take anything from you chooses instead to ask. Then one day, I opened a drawer in the wardrobe and found it. A small leather box. Inside was a thin silver bracelet. Delicate, worn, and inside the lid, etched in Cassian's handwriting. A promise I failed to keep. My fingers went cold, because I knew, without needing to ask, that it had belonged to her. When I confronted him that evening, I wasn't angry, just hollow. I found the bracelet. He didn't deny it, didn't try to explain. "She gave it to me the night before she died," he said quietly. I was supposed to meet her the next morning, but I was late. 10 minutes. He exhaled like the air itself resisted him. She jumped before I arrived. I stared at him, not because of what he said, but because this was the first time I saw shame on his face, real shame, raw and unshaped. Like he had lived 1,000 days in that one moment and never found the end of it. "You can't keep me here to finish what you couldn't fix," I said. "I'm not your absolution." He looked at me like a drowning man looks at shore, not with hope, but with disbelief. "I know that too," he said. "Now." That night, I left my door open, not as an invitation, as a choice. He came. He stood in the doorway, not crossing the threshold, just watching me, hands by his sides like he didn't trust them. I don't want to lose you, he said. You don't have me, I replied. Not yet. He nodded, and for the first time, he turned around and left. I closed the door. Then I cried, because I knew something had shifted. Not in him, in me, and I wasn't sure I'd ever shift back. It snowed the next morning, not just flakes, drifting gently. This was a storm, thick and relentless, the kind that buried fences and silenced roads, the kind that made the world disappear 1 inch at a time. I stood in the kitchen, fingers curled around a chipped ceramic mug, watching the frost snake along the window. My reflection blurred and reformed with each gust of wind. Behind me, the house was quiet. Cassian hadn't come down yet, or maybe he had and left before I stirred. We'd learned to orbit each other without touching, without speaking much. A silence that once bruised now rested, like breath between words. I'd changed, not in appearance. The girl in the mirror still wore linen and braids, still flinched at loud sounds. But something inside had shifted, molted. I no longer felt like a victim trapped in a house. I felt like something else now, something in between a woman and a warning. Later that day, I found Cassian in the conservatory. He was alone, coat half-buttoned, watching the snow settle on the glass ceiling. His face was unreadable. A book lay closed on the bench beside him. He didn't speak when I entered, and I didn't offer a greeting. We sat in silence, the way some people sit in pews, reverent, unsure of what they're praying to. He broke the stillness. She loved storms, he said quietly. I didn't ask who. He didn't have to clarify. She said the noise gave her permission to be messy, as if the world outside could match the weather inside. I looked at him, not with pity, but with a clarity that surprised even me. You don't owe her your life, I said. His mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. I don't, he agreed, but I gave it anyway. That night I opened my door for him again. Not because I felt sorry, not because I wanted to fix him, but because I'd finally buried the girl I was. The one who flinched, who waited, who only ever did what was asked. She had died in that snowstorm, quietly, without ceremony, and I didn't mourn her. I walked barefoot to my bed, sat on its edge, waited. Cassian appeared in the doorway like a man asked to kneel when he'd spent his life standing. He didn't say a word. He just entered. He touched me like a man unlearning violence. Slowly, carefully. His hands didn't press. They listened. His breath matched mine. His eyes, once sharp as flint, softened as they searched my face for something neither of us had named yet. When he kissed me, it wasn't hungry. It was reverent. And when I kissed him back, it wasn't out of duty. It was surrender. I guided his hand under the hem of my nightgown. I whispered, "This is mine to give." He paused, eyes wide. No longer the man in control, just a man, undone by permission. "Then I'll take only what you offer," he said. I placed his hand over my heart. "Then take this first." What happened next was not like the other nights. It wasn't possession. It was communion. The bed creaked beneath our rhythm. The sheets tangled around our legs. His mouth moved across my skin with a kind of ache, like he was mourning every moment he'd ever touched me without care. I clutched his back, pulled him closer, whispered things I didn't know I knew how to say. "You're not hers. You don't have to disappear to be forgiven. You're not a sin." After, he didn't leave. He stayed. His arm curled around my waist, my head on his chest. We breathed like a single organism, like two animals who had survived the same storm and found the same cave. I closed my eyes, not from exhaustion, but from relief. In the morning, I woke to find him still there, eyes closed, lips parted. Human. I traced the scar beneath his collarbone, a small pale mark, shaped like a crescent moon. He stirred, but didn't flinch. I dreamed of fire again, he said. I know, I whispered. You always smell of smoke in your sleep. He smiled. The first real one. I didn't burn this time, he said. I pressed my lips to his throat. No, I said, because this time, someone stayed. The snow began to melt 3 days later. Thin trickles ran down the gutters, catching the morning sun. I stood by the kitchen sink, rinsing a teacup, and watched the water drip like time, like memory. The air inside the house was warmer now, softer. Something had shifted between us, not loudly, but completely. Cassian still didn't say much, but he looked at me differently. Not with hunger, not with guilt, with recognition. Like I was no longer the girl he bought. Like I was someone he had found. We fell into quiet habits. He made coffee too strong. I added sugar when he wasn't looking. He left newspapers on the porch. I clipped out the crossword puzzles. Sometimes we read in the same room and said nothing, and it didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like breath. We hadn't made love again since that night. Not because we were afraid to, but because we didn't need to prove anything anymore. I knew I was wanted. He knew he was forgiven. For now, that was enough. Then my father returned. He didn't knock. Just banged on the iron gate until a groundskeeper called the house. I was in the conservatory when Cassian found me. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. There's someone at the gate, he said. You should decide what happens next. That was new. He didn't say I'll handle it. He said you decide. I hadn't seen my father in months. Not since he sold me like a lamb at auction, shaking Cassian's hand without once looking at mine. Now, he stood outside in a fraying coat, his eyes bloodshot, his breath visible in the cold. Let me in, girl, he said. We need to talk. I didn't move. Cassian stood beside me, quiet, solid. My father glanced at him. You got what you paid for, didn't you? Now, maybe you can do a little more for your old man. Cassian didn't flinch, but I did. I stepped forward, voice flat. You don't get to call me girl anymore. My father blinked. What's gotten into you? Out, I corrected. What's gotten out of me? He scowled. I raised you. You pawned me. Cassian's hand brushed mine. I didn't look at him, but I felt the way he stood still, letting me speak, not taking this from me. I needed money, my father said. I made a deal. No, I said. You made a choice. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came. The wind picked up. Loose snow danced between us. For a moment, I saw how small he really was. Not just in stature, but in weight. All those years I feared him, and now he looked like a man crushed by his own cowardice. I have nothing left, he mumbled. I thought maybe he... Cassian finally stepped forward and handed him an envelope. There's enough in there to leave, Cassian said, and never come back. My father reached for it. That's generous. Cassian didn't smile. It's not a gift. He left without saying goodbye, and I didn't cry. Not for him. Not for the child I'd been when I still wanted his love. Back inside, I stood by the fireplace, arms wrapped around myself. The silence didn't feel comforting today. It felt full. Unspoken things hanging between us like smoke. Cassian poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed me one, sat down beside me without asking if I wanted to talk. But I did. You didn't owe him anything, I said. I know. And you didn't owe me that choice. He looked at me then. Really looked. I didn't know how to give anything before you. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he'd ever come. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." That wasn't his language. He said, "You decide." He said I didn't know how to give. He said stay in the way he made room for me at his table, in his house, in his quiet. And sometimes, silence is a kind of love, if it listens. Later that evening, I found the envelope Cassian had given my father, still sitting by the front door, unopened, untouched. He hadn't taken the money, just the shame, and gone. Cassian stood by the window in the hall, one hand against the glass, watching the last patches of snow vanish into the earth. I joined, him not speaking, just standing close enough that our arms brushed. He didn't turn to face me, but his hand found mine, and in that quiet gesture, I heard all the words he hadn't said. You are not a commodity. You are not her. You are not alone. There was no ticking, clock, no alarms, no calendar marked with red ink, but I felt the date approaching like a slow tide, quiet but inevitable. 12 months since the day I was handed over like a receipt. Year since the night I lay still beneath a man I didn't know. Since then, everything had changed. Not in great cinematic ways, but in the details. The way my name sounded in his voice. The way my body no longer flinched when he reached for me. The way the house now smelled faintly of lavender instead of dust. But something else had changed too. Something I couldn't touch. I wasn't afraid anymore. And I wasn't his anymore either. Not unless I chose to be. I stood in the garden, that morning, boots sinking into thawing soil, watching new buds fight their way through last winter's wreckage. The world was making room for life again. Cassian found me there, hands in his coat pockets, collar turned up against the breeze. "Spring, suits you," he said. I looked down at my gloves, stained with dirt. "It's messy." "So are most beautiful things," he replied. He didn't kiss me, didn't touch me, but I felt the weight of what he wasn't saying. He knew, as I did, that our contract ended tomorrow, and neither of us had mentioned it. That evening, I found a folded piece of paper on the table beside the tea tray, Cassian's handwriting, my name at the top. Underneath, termination agreement. It was blank. No demands. No fine print. Just a signature line and a pen. When I found him in the study, he was standing by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, like he was holding something up inside himself. "You could have just let it expire," I said, holding the paper. "I needed you to know," he said, eyes steady. "You owe me nothing, not even a goodbye." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because he'd set me free, but because I realized just how long I'd lived waiting for someone to decide things for me. He was giving me a choice, not wrapped in roses, not dressed in promises, just laid, bare, like a map with no compass. "I'm not leaving tonight," I said. "I didn't think you would." He walked over, took the paper from my hands, and fed it to the fire. We watched it curl and vanish. Later, we lay on the couch, tangled, in blankets, feet pressed together for warmth. No touching beyond that. No kiss. No seduction. Just stillness. Breathing. We watched the flames soften into embers, and Cassian said, "I've never loved someone I didn't ruin." I turned my face toward him. "Then try not to ruin this." His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. At dawn, I packed a small bag, not because I was leaving, because I needed to know I could. I placed it at the edge of the bed, sat beside it. Cassian came in, hair damp from the shower, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked at the bag, then at me. No fear in his face, Just waiting. I held his gaze. If I stay, it's because I want to. He nodded. Then, without speaking, he walked to the dresser, opened the top drawer, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and handed it to me. No more contracts. That's all it said. At the bottom, he'd signed his name and left a blank space below it. My fingers trembled. Then I signed. Not because I was agreeing to anything, because I was choosing him. That night, we celebrated the most ordinary way, with dinner we cooked together. Burnt garlic bread, overcooked pasta, 2 mismatched plates. I laughed for the first time in weeks. Cassian looked up, startled. You sound like someone who remembers how. Remember what? How to be happy. I tilted my head. It's not always joy. Sometimes it's just being unafraid. He raised his glass. To the end of fear. I touched mine to his, and to love with no paperwork. When we made love that night, there was no desperation, no proof to offer, no ownership to assert, just 2 people who had burned down everything between them and decided to stay anyway. It took me weeks to open the door, the one at the end of the hall, the room I was first given. The one with no windows, no warmth, just a bed and silence, and the memory of a girl who thought survival meant stillness. I passed it daily. Sometimes I paused, hand hovering near the knob. Sometimes I walked faster, as if my footsteps might outrun what waited inside, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Just not ready. Cassian never asked about it. He never mentioned that the sheets had been changed, that the lamp had been replaced, that the furniture had been rearranged so gently I might have missed it. But I saw it, and I knew it wasn't the staff. He'd been tending to that room like someone tending to a grave, not to bury it, but to make it livable again. The morning I finally turned the knob, the air smelled different, like cedar and morning light. It was the same room, but it wasn't. There was a window now. Narrow, tall, newly cut through stone. Sunlight poured in like forgiveness, spilling across the floorboards in long golden stripes. The bed had been moved to face it. A small table sat beneath the sill. On it, a teacup, a folded quilt, and a note. In his handwriting, for when you're ready to come home. To yourself. I sat down. The light hit my hands, warm, soft. And suddenly, I remembered everything. Not in pain, but in clarity. The first night. The silence. The cold. The way I didn't say no. The way I didn't say anything at all. And now, the quiet was different. Now it waited for my words. That evening I told him I wanted to sleep there again, not to reclaim anything, not to erase it, just to stand where I once felt powerless, and choose it differently. He didn't say no. He didn't hesitate. He just nodded and said, "Then I'll sleep on the couch." But I took his hand before he left the room. "No," I said. "Stay, if you want to." He did. We lay side by side, the moonlight slicing across the floor like silver ribbon. My head on his chest, his fingers brushing along my spine. I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore, because I had found my own light. Sometime after midnight, I whispered, "Why did you make the window?" Cassian was quiet a long time before answering. "Because the day you stopped asking for permission," he said, "I started seeing the house differently. I wanted to let light in. For you. But maybe also for me." I smiled into his shoulder. "I think you were born in shadows," I said. "And you?" he asked. "I was born in silence." We lay like that until morning. 2 people who had once been strangers to their own softness, now breathing in the same rhythm. No contract, no guilt, no shame. only stillness, only presence. Spring turned the hills green again. The garden bloomed. The birds returned. Cassian planted herbs. I painted in the sunroom. We lived like people who had known winter too long, not trying to forget it, but learning how to bloom in spite of it. Sometimes, we didn't speak for hours, but our silences had grown roots. They weren't empty anymore. They held meaning, held memory, held us. One afternoon, I found a letter on my pillow, unfolded. No envelope. Just 7 words, written in the middle of the page. I stay because you never asked me to. I read it twice. Then I tucked it into my journal. Not because I needed to remember it, but because some words are too precious to keep out in the air too long. He never proposed. I never wore white. We never made promises in front of anyone else. But every morning, he made me tea. Every evening, I folded his shirts. And every night, we slept in the room that used to be a cell, now washed in light. Love, I learned, isn't a declaration. It's not even a feeling. It's the quiet repetition of presence. And so when people ask me how we ended up here, in this old stone house with creaking floorboards and a kitchen that always smells like time, I tell them this: he bought me once. But I gave myself to him. Not all at once, not right away, but piece by piece, breath by breath. And one day, I woke up and realized there was no more debt between us, only choice, only light. If this story moved you, if it made you feel, even just for a moment, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps bring more quiet, powerful stories like this to life.